I'm really happy to introduce Joanna. For those who don't know, she has announced that she will be retiring soon. So this is an amazing opportunity for her to share her wealth of knowledge and experience working with California state budget with all of you. And a great opportunity for all of you to kind of really understand this better, because it is ultimately where almost all of us get the funding for all of our schools. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Joanna Valentine, our research director, to start walking us through the state budget and how it all works. Joanna, over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Zev. So we're going to touch on a lot of topics because our union constituency is very broad, and I want you to, the best of my ability, at least get a taste for every aspect of it, from early childhood through university level funding. So I admit that it's going to be a high level, and depending on how much time we have, we might be able to go in deeper on each one. But for the moment, we're going to start off there. Know that with anything, when I'm talking about K-12 or K-14, or that I'm also always going to be talking about classified employees and funding that's available to you there as well. So we may sound like we're always talking teacher, but I'm going to always be talking about classified because you're my peeps. So why don't we go to the first slide? And just as an overview, it sounds kind of ridiculous, but the state budget is actually comprised of the state money and federal money. So as you can see from this, 65% of our budget is comprised of 3 different funds. And the general fund accounts for the revenues that are not designated for specific things. So say, for example, there might be a fee or a tax on your car, but that goes specifically for fixing the roads. Whereas the general fund money is available for non-designated purposes, except that it's designated for education, health and human services, and the state prisons. There are over 500 different special funds that come in the form of taxes, fees, and licenses. And again, those are for specific purposes. Of our budget, the federal funds comprises 35% of it. So while we always feel like it's, so state driven, it obviously is, but there is a chunk of it that does matter what happens at the federal level as well. Okay, Zev, thank you. So the one thing I wanted to show is the difference between what happens with the general fund and all funds. With the general fund, you can see that K-12 is the predominant expense there. It's about 40% of the general fund budget. Then comes health and human services, and then higher education. When you take into account all funds, you would be looking at health and human services being the number one thing that we pay for in our budgets. So it's just an interesting dichotomy, but the K-12 and higher education, are still up there in the top, because this is where the bulk of our money goes and where the bulk of our money as educators comes from. Okay, so the sources for revenue for the state general fund is generally looked at, and this is true, that it's personal income tax predominantly, which is a very volatile thing for obvious reasons. If people are making money and they're making good money, then they're going to be paying good personal income taxes. They'll also be out shopping, which then provides good sales tax. But if income is down for people, then personal income tax goes down as well. So you can see, though, that these factors are the ones that play into how the state gets revenue. But they also, and this isn't on this chart, but I just want to also kind of keep it in your mind, that when they are figuring out what their revenues will be, they will be taking into account the local the local property taxes that will be happening in every county, and how that affects, jumped ahead there, and how that affects the amount of revenue that they have available when they start doing the calculations. And we're going to get into how that works and what happens when they do the calculations and then they back out the property taxes. So we'll get into that in a second. Okay, moving right along. All right, so why should we care about the state budget? That seems far away. It's Sacramento, it's not my backyard, but in fact, the state budget is where, again, everything comes from for our public services. So the decisions that are made in Sacramento are the decisions that affect your local district, or if you're an early childhood provider, it will affect those decisions and those revenues at your local level. Then the local decisions, particularly as the state government has been giving more and more responsibility on the local level, the state government will say, this is what you get, and the local government, your local providers are who's making the decisions about how those funds will be used. But your local decisions then determine what happens at your district. And the bottom, at least on my screen, the bottom line is cut off there, but the budgets always reflect priorities and values. And you have to remember that even at your district budget, that when you're seeing things, and you're seeing things like the administrations, they're hiring 5 new administration and they're not paying the classified salaries that, aren't getting any higher. You have to remember that's about priorities and values, and you have to call people out on that. And the line that's kind of cutting on my screen says priorities can be influenced. And at the end, we're going to talk about how you can do that. So this is sort of the chain of how money gets dispersed. So the governor puts out a proposed budget in January with the Department of Finance, and the legislature takes a look at it and starts determining, okay, what do we want to do here? What of the governor's proposals do we like? What ones don't we like? That's when lobbyists start coming in and saying, these are our priorities. But this is the chain of how that money is given out. So you think, oh, my salaries and benefits, if I'm at a K-12 school, comes from the Department of Education, that then goes to my county office of education or to my district and then comes to me. But in fact, and Zev, if you just click once, the governor, the legislature, and the Department of Finance are who are influencing your salary, benefits, categorical and special programs that can come. An example of a special program would be like part-time office hours for community college faculty. So those are the kinds of things that they have a say in, because those are the kinds of things they put money into at their discretion, but with the influence of as many people as they hear from. So that's going to be an important thing. Moving right along. This is my favorite slide. It looks like the it looks like the subway system in New York, but it is how early childhood is funded, and it is this complicated. There are a mix of federal and state dollars that go into, as you can see, that go into childhood programs. There are approximately 1,300 contracts dispersed through approximately 713 public and private agencies. This can include migrant child care and development, the state preschool program, block grants, Head Start. But as you can see, it's a pretty complicated weave that we have. So to make this a little simpler, if you would go to the next slide, I tried to break out just the kind of the top line ones here. So at the state level, you can see it's the Department of Education and Public Health, First 5 California, Social Services. The local level, it can be your county welfare departments, your school district, sometimes SELPA if it's early childhood with children with special needs, and then the providers, which can be a variety of different kinds of providers. And some of them are LEA based, some of them are not, but they're, they all need to be licensed, and there need to be regulations put on them, but they all get money from the various sources that we looked at. And if you would just click once, one thing I wanted to talk about is in the 2020-21 budget, Governor Newsom proposed a Department of Early Childhood Development. It would be under the auspices of the California Health and Human Services Agency. And the idea is, think back about that slide that looked like a subway chart. The idea is to try and streamline some of these programs so that there is not so many places that people are getting money. It's just too confusing and unwieldy for both the providers, the people getting the money, the people giving out the money. It's just become too complicated. So everything would be kept under there with the exception of the state preschool program and the State Board of Education. But everything else under this proposal, and it still has a lot to go through. The one thing I should have said earlier about the budget proposal is the governor comes out and makes these proposals. Then in May, he or she will come back. And the reason that it happens in May is by May, they have an idea of what the revenues are. In January, they're doing a best guess based on what the revenues have been to date. But by May, they'll have a better idea of what the revenues are. And they'll also have a better idea of what the cost of living allowance will be. So they do a May revise. And by the time of the May revise, they will have heard from a lot of their constituencies in terms of what are your priorities, and we want money for this, and we want money for that. So there may be some dramatic changes. It just depends. Usually it's for the governor, it's not terribly dramatic, and this is Newsom's only his second budget, so it'll be interesting to see how much the legislature goes along with him, but we are a majority Democratic legislature, so chances are good that what he asks for will generally be in the ballpark of what he will get. So,
and Joanna, will you be going over the timeline again and the opportunities,
yes,
the places where we actually can play a role?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Good question. Okay, we can move. So the next thing we'll talk about is K-14 funding, which comes predominantly from Proposition 98. The split on that for K-12 and community college is about 89% K-12, 11% goes to community college. But you can also see where the other money comes from. And this is where, again, the local property taxes are going to come into play. And we're going to really look at that in a minute. But there also might be other local funds. For example, at community colleges, it might be your student fees. The lottery, which is always interesting, and I think people are sort of over-giving this argument about why do you still need more money when there's a lottery, but you can see what a really small piece of the pie that is in terms of the funding for our schools. So that gives you, though, the general idea of where the funds come from for education for K-14. With Proposition 98, and I'm not going to go too in depth into this for a couple of reasons, mostly that it's just unbelievably confusing. But there are 3 tests. And so at the beginning of the fiscal year, the Department of Finance sits down and says, okay, what test are we going to be under? And it has to do with whether or not you're going to get a percentage of the state general fund revenues, or if there's going to be money based on prior year plus inflation and ADA growth. Because we're in a situation right now where ADA and enrollment is declining, we're pretty much just going to be sticking with test 1, which again has to do with just a percentage, a fixed percentage of the state general fund. And another thing that needs to be brought up here is that Proposition 98 was put into place because there just was not good funding for education. But it was not put in place, and you'll hear this expression a lot, to be a ceiling. It was put in place to be a floor. And the legislature and the governor have every right to say, you can have more money than what is in Proposition 98. Lately, it has been, here's COLA, here's cost of living adjustment, and that's what we're going to give you for Prop 98, and that's it. And it's frankly not been enough, and that's why we are working on things like schools and communities first, so that we have opportunities to try and find ways to bring more revenue, not to take the place of Prop 98, but to add to Prop 98 funding. Okie dokie. All right, so let's start with K-12 and LCSF, which stands for Local Control Funding Formula. For those of you who know this, I'm sorry, I'll try and be quick, but it has a base grant that is based on ADA by grade span. There is a supplemental grant that is based on the number of students who have free and reduced price lunch, foster youth, and English learners. and that is an unduplicated percentage. So if you are more than one of those things, you're still only counted as one. Then there is a concentration grant based on if the district has a percentage of unduplicated students over 55%. So the percentage over 55, they will get additional funds based on that. And there are rates that are set every year for these things. If there's COLA on one, the COLA will happen to the base, but then that then makes the COLA go to everything else, because it's all dependent on the supplemental and concentration grants are dependent on what the base grant is. There are also grade span adjustments for class K-12 class size. The one caveat to that is that if there is a agreement in the collective bargaining agreement that says otherwise, but the goal is to get 1 to 24 in K3, but if there is a otherwise bargained agreement that supersedes this rule, and the district will still get money. And then there was also additional money for, this isn't clear here, but for 9 to 12 for some technical funding, and again, because those programs can be more. The funding also, outside of the LCFF, you would still have your categorical programs and grants. The idea when they started LCFF was to get rid of those. They wanted the idea, the way it's stated is that you have, is that you have local control. So they're trying to get rid of the state saying you have to do this and here's the money for it. You have to do this and here's the money for it. And what has happened in previous years that is not happening this year is that when they were issuing one-time, I don't know if the internet's unstable or yours. They were issuing more funds on a one-time basis, and they were letting districts have flexibility with that. Well, this year in this budget proposal, they do have some funds, and I'm not going to talk specifically about this, but they do have some funds. But the state is saying we have some funds, but here's what we want you to do with them. We want you to use this on X, Y, and Z. And there's a little bit of pushback from some of the management groups saying you're going back to categorical programs. You have these one-time funds, give it to us, let us do with it what we want. And instead they're saying, and some of the programs are suggesting are very, very good programs. You know, it's teacher training and opportunities for classified staff. But the management side of it is like, no, we want that money. We want to be able to do with it what we want. So that's another thing to always kind of be aware of, is whether or not funds are coming to the district in with leeway, or if they're coming and they're being told what to do with them. The LCFF was started several years ago, and it got to what they call full implementation, which the idea of which was to get everybody back to the 2008, which is great. But it is, it means that this is now a COLA only thing to do is to give cost of living adjustment augmentation. They're not promising any more money. And so there's some legislative issues, I think, that Ron has talked about several times, to try and raise the base. And again, if you raise the base, that'll hit the supplemental and concentration. There is a bit of blowback as to whether or not this program has worked exactly like it was supposed to. Districts are required to do what's called an LCAP, which is to show that they use the money exactly like they said they were going to use the money, and exactly they have to plan, okay, with the supplemental money, we're going to do this, with the concentration money, we're going to do this, and they're supposed to prove that they in fact did it. And they keep making new templates because people don't understand these reports, and it's causing a lot of problems because there is a feeling that maybe the students who this was intended to serve have not been properly served. So there have been different changes to the LCAP report, and they're trying to make it as simple as possible so that the average person can go in, look at the report and say, yes, I see that you got $1 million to help students who are foster youth and English learners, and I see exactly where this program helped that and exactly where that money got spent. So just be aware of that. The important dates for LCFF, the advanced apportionment, which is, again, kind of the best guess of what the district is going to get, comes out on July 20th. They obviously have to start school in September. So they're dealing with last year's ADA figure and unduplicated. And then as the new, I can't think of the word, but when they tell them that these are exactly how many students we have, and this is exactly how many are, fall into these different things, then they'll make an adjustment in the first apportionment, which is February 20th, and the second apportionment, which is June 25th. So they're kind of constantly going back in and saying, is your ADA staying stable? Is your, are your number of unduplicated students staying stable? Are we funding you exactly to what your needs are? Okay, now let's talk about community college. So community college, they liked LCFF so much, they decided to do it to community college. And this is called the Student-Centered Funding Formula, the SCFF. Again, the intent was good, and that was to try and to help students who might have some special needs. So they kind of went with the same thing. The base grant is based on enrollment, FTES, the number of full-time equivalent students, also the size of the district, how many colleges you have on the district, and if you have any student centers. So there's funding for all of that, which is exactly how it used to be. But that is now only 70% of the funding. And now they have added on supplemental funding, which is again based on students who are receiving College Promise or Pell Grants, and also students who are Dreamers. So the number of students that qualify for that will get more money for that district. Then they have a third element, which is outcomes, and this is based on graduation rates and transfers for your colleges. When you get out of college, are you going into a job that pays you the going wage in the county? I mean, it's a lot of factors, and it has not been terribly popular with CFT for obvious reasons, because we don't like outcome performance-based type of programs, because it tends to lead to cutting classes, teaching to test, just becoming a factory for getting people diplomas, as opposed to really caring about the students on a deep level. There are some categorical programs and grants opportunities, again, for the different programs that come up for classified or for part-time faculty. Those kind of programs fall under the categorical programs. Same situation here, except that this is a little bit crazy the way they do this, but the advanced apportionment again comes out in July because districts have to get started. So they are based on their prior FTES. They then report their statistics to the chancellor's office in February, and then they get a P1. Well, they report it before February, but then there will be a P1 allocation, a P2 in February, a P2 allocation in June, and then they go back in February and recalculate the prior year. So they're constantly changing how much money they're giving the district. Now, the thing about this SCFF grant is that it is, like I said earlier, 70% base, 20% supplemental, and 10% based on outcomes. However, what the state realized was that could hurt some districts, and so they have a hold harmless provision that if once they've done these calculations, you are going to make less than you made in 17-18 plus COLA. So whatever the district got in 17-8 is the wrong word, but whatever the district received in 2017-18 plus the first year it was 18-19's COLA, if that figure was greater than what they calculated the SCFF figure to be, the district would be held harmless and they would get the greater of the two figures. They have extended that hold harmless to 2021-22, so it will always be 17-18 plus COLA, 18-19 plus COLA, 19-20 plus COLA. Like, it will always build up on the COLA, and if that rate is greater than what you would have gotten under SCFF, the district will get that. The problem obviously comes, what happens when the hold harmless is over, and do districts suddenly fall off a cliff if they have not been able to generate the kinds of things that will affect how they're funded? So, you know, are they not getting more students? Are they not, again, with the outcomes? Under LCFF, somebody went said to me, oh, we got to get more students into the free and reduced, you know, price lunch. And I'm like, well, not because you want to get more money, but because they're hungry. So you got to make sure that that people don't start trying to play the system. And so there are some concerns about what will happen down the road. We do have a lot of things in place to try and deal with this particular thing. And one of them is trying to get the outcomes that was going to at one point be, at the end, it was going to be 60% base, 20% supplemental, and 20% outcome. And we were able to, through talking to the legislature, keep the outcomes at 10%. But I think we would like to see those go away completely. So, all right, now we're going to talk about property taxes and how those play in here. So I'm going to make this statement, and then I'm going to show you an example, or two examples, or three examples. The LCFF and the SCFF are calculated by the state. Then they say, okay, this is what you're owed. Now we're going to go in and we're going to back into that figure. If the amount of the property tax is less than the number that the state came up with that the district should receive, they will fill it in till they get to the point that they meet that calculation. If the funding is more from property taxes than what the state thought that the district should receive, they get to keep the extra money. So that's what's called the basic aid district, or a community, got the other term because I don't use it. We'll come to it in a second, sorry.
And just to be clear, Joanna, that is not a hard fixed dollar amount. That's a historical figure that could be different for every district, right?
Correct. I mean, the property taxes, again, they're and in the same way that they're having to guess a lot of other stuff when they start doing these things, they're having to try and guess with input from the assessor's office in every county what the property tax rate will be and how much the property tax increase will be. But districts can fall in and out of basic aid status. Let's go to the next slide and I can kind of do a better job of what I'm trying to talk about. So this is for K-12. This is what an LCFF calculation looks like. If you would click once, the number I want you to particularly pay attention to here is the 29,662,702. So that is the calculation based on, as you can see, the average daily attendance by grade span, plus any supplemental and concentration grant funding. Then if you, I can't tell if that's just on mine, but at the bottom, can you see that total figure? Well, the point I'm trying to make here is that if you look at the line that says local revenue, what they did is they then say, okay, we owe the district $29 million. Of that, we know that they will get $11 million from local revenue, which is property taxes. Plus, they get the education protection account, which is, again, Proposition 30 and Proposition 55, and that was money that we raised through taxes that has to be used for educational purposes, which is why they account for it differently. They account for it separately because it cannot be used for administration salaries or anything like that. The bottom line there, which I can't see on my screen, so I hope you can, but then they add in this state aid before MSA, and that is just a guarantee that districts are held harmless, but in the end, it should add up to the 29,662,702. So I'm assuming that shows, I hope, on everybody else's screen. It's not showing on mine. So if you could click to the next one. I'm not doing the best job of explaining this, but I think this will help make it clearer.
I was just going to say, if we need to go back to this in the Q&A, I can pull this slide out and blow it up so people can see it.
Yeah. Let's go to the next one and just show this as a basic aid. So in this situation, oh, this one's better. In this situation, click once, please. you can see that this district is entitled to $195 million. But look at their local revenue. If you would click again, you see that their local revenue far exceeds what the state determined that they were entitled to. So they get that revenue, they get those property taxes, plus they get the education protection account, plus they get some additional funding. Again, it's as a formula that just keeps them whole to make sure that they don't get less than they would have gotten. But you can see what a difference it makes for a district like this that is basic aid or community supported districts, that was the phrase I couldn't come up with, that what a difference that makes, because the property taxes in this particular, this happens to be Newport Mesa, and you can see what a difference that makes for this district, because they far exceed. For ones where they don't far exceed, and the one I can pick up off the top of my head, and I know Bill is on this call, is Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz is a basic aid district when they combine the elementary and high school together, but it's not by a lot. And so then it's like, wow, if we, if this were a slightly different world, we would be getting the concentration supplemental grants, but we're not, because we're in a property tax world. So then you're reliant on the percentage that property taxes are going up. And let's just do one more to show this in the community college world. This is a very convoluted formula, not my fault, but if you would just click once, I can show you the figure that the district. So the adjusted TCR, which is a total calculated revenue, is $60 million, and the property tax portion of that is only $18 million. So this is not a basic aid or community supported school. But the other thing to note that they do, they not only back out if you click once again, Bev, they not only back out the property taxes, they also back out the student enrollment fees. So they're going to take the figure 64,81653, and they're going to, I'm saying back out, you still get the money, but you just get the money from a different resource. And they're going to back out the property taxes, and they're going to back out the enrollment fees. Then they come up with the figure, okay, this will be the general apportionment. This is what the state will give you to make sure we get to that figure, plus the EPA, the education protection account. And then there's another factor that fits in here, which is to do with full-time hiring funds that are available to districts to bring up the number of full-time faculty.
So in this,
so if that, go ahead.
In this model, Joanna, the top half of what people are looking at, that's what's just calculated according to the student-centered funding formula, right? Correct.
The bottom, and I'm sorry for all that craziness, but the situation is that they said, okay, according to the student-centered funding formula, you get $60,548,000. If you were just being held harmless, which would have been the 1718 TCR plus the COLA, then you would get 60,006. So you get the higher of those two figures, except that, and I should have mentioned this, except that the problem with the student-centered funding formula is they didn't have enough money to fund it. So wise people in Sacramento came up with this great idea. They did it based on some old data, thought they could afford it. They couldn't afford it. So they don't pay the full amount that's due. They deficit it twice. So that's what the constrained TCR is. That's what that number refers to, is them trying to figure out a way, okay, we only have so much money, and so we've got to figure out how we can give everybody their money, but we're not going to give them all their money. So that's why that is such a complicated formula.
And the bottom part is looking first at the revenue that they're already getting, and then figuring out what the state needs to make up to get them what they would be allotted under the formula, right?
Correct. Thank you. That's saying it better than I did, but yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Oh, I'm flattered. This stuff is really complicated. So if I can state anything about this simply, I'll consider that a compliment. All right.
All right. Well, let's move on, because that was painful enough, right? So the California Adult Education Program, I think everybody knows, but maybe not, that the adult education program is done through consortiums, and it is done through both the community college and the K-12. It just depends on which consortium your district is a member of, if they have an adult education program. But it is up to the consortium to collect information about how many adult learners you have and what kind of programs you're having and what kind of outcomes you're having. And then from there, the chancellor and the state superintendent of public instruction get together and figure out how much money to allocate to each one. In 2016-17, they put $500 million into this program, and then it took a couple of years before they started giving it COLA. But as of 2018, they retroactively gave it COLA, and then they continue to give it COLA. But it's based on need, and it's based on program outcomes. I think it's probably a teeny weeny bit arbitrary because I don't know how much they really stop and study it, but that is the intent. Anyways. Okay, special education. In case your head wasn't hurting enough. Special education is another very complicated thing, but that has money that comes from federal and state. Some of the money goes directly to sources. Most of the money goes through the SELPAs, which is the special education. I had the acronym there a minute ago, but I don't have it now. But they are a governing organization that sort of doles out the money. So the different districts will go through different SELPAs. There are some districts that are their own SELPA, but most SELPAs are made up of either county offices of education programs or just they're in with other districts. And then AB 602, which was an assembly bill, was a bill that was put out that was supposed to simplify funding. And it's just the problem with it is that it is just sorely underfunded. They have been paying, historically, they have been paying special ed based on LEA's ADA, but on the total ADA rather than on the number of students that a district might have or an LEA might have that have special needs. And as a consequence, that has made for very, very unstable funding rates. And so there are some districts that are very, very high, and there's some districts that are very, very low. And so the last couple of years, what the budget is trying to do, they did this in 1920, and they're doing these proposed for 2021, is that they're trying to even up this average rate. So for 2021, there is $645 million proposed to try and level up the target rate per ADA, and the rate they're trying to get to is between $640 and $680 per ADA. If you were in a district, there's about 100 districts that are over that average. If you are in a district that is over, they will be held harmless. They're not going to get hurt and brought back down to that amount, but they will, most every other district should see more money. Then they are going to spend some money and try and figure out what are we doing, because this plan is not working. Districts are constantly having to take money from the general fund and their unrestricted funds and put it towards special education. The Department of Finance's opinion about that is that, students are students first. They're part of what they call general population first. And then if they're special education, they just need some more money allotted to them, but it's just never been enough money. So the legislature and the governor have realized this is not working. The way we're doing this is not working. We're not allowing enough money. So they're going to go through and study the whole system of the SELPA management and see what they can do to improve that. And probably the one thing they did do this year that was is a change, or that they want to do this year, is to base it on a 3-year rolling average, which will allow for some fluctuations. But the problem has become that districts are suffering from declining enrollment, but more and more students are being identified as students with special needs. So it is just made for a very, very uneven and unfair funding situation.
And Joanna, I know that this is beyond the scope of what you're talking about because it's not a state budget issue. But we are trying to work with AFT to tackle the bigger problem on this.
Mhm.
which is that the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, otherwise known as IDEA, that actually mandates all of these requirements for least restrictive environment and all of those requirements for special education, has never been funded. I think the last statistic I saw was that it funds something in the neighborhood of 15% of the actual requirements to be in compliance with the Act. So the state and local districts are on the hook for the other 85%. And the
Right.
state has tried to fill that in with additional funding, but it's not even close to what's required. And so there's a state, we were working with the state, I think, to do what we can to fix that. But you've also probably heard some of the presidential candidates talk in school forums about the need to fix this nationally.
Yes, so you're absolutely correct. And the federal dollars have not been adequate at all and are dwindling also. So you're absolutely right about that, that the issue is certainly starts there. And there are a lot of mandates that go with this that are then not funded. There are a lot of rules and requirements that are then not, that there's no revenue source for. Okay, then, let's go to career technical education. So there are several different programs under career technical education. The K-12 Strong Workforce Program, the Career Technical Education Incentive Grant Program. There are some grants that are in the that are there to meet requirements that are in the education code, and almost all of these require matching funds. So anything that is a grant, the district has to apply for. And then if there's a matching funds part of that, then they have to not only apply for the grant, but also provide matching funds. But these are separated into different categories, and they are based on ADA, and ADA that involved in these various programs. We're going to do 2 seconds on Cal State. We don't have locals that are in the Cal State system, but I know that we do have some faculty that teach in the Cal State system. So the Cal State universities have 2 main funding sources, the State General Fund and student tuition. And now state funding is covering slightly more than half of CSU's costs, operating costs. And then they also have auxiliaries and philanthropic support. So community people who want to give money to the university and get a building named after them, or something of that nature. That's another way that they get money to do their special services and special programs that they want to do. University of California. You can see what the breakdown is here, and you can see that the state fund is, for the revenue, is about 40% of what the University of California gets their revenue from. Governor Brown frequently had I'm going to give you XYZ amount of money, and you've got to promise not to raise the student fees. Or you've got to, he certainly had some different contingencies, and student fees and tuition was one of them. Another was getting more students who were in state, as opposed to, because the universities get more money for students who are from out of state. So he was trying to, make sure that it served the state students as well. Their expenditures, as you can see, for faculty and staff is 48% of their revenues, of their expenditures, and benefits 20%. So you can see how the two kind of side next to each other. But financial aid is a small amount. It's 15%, and equipment and supplies the other 17%. Okay. I'm tired of talking. All right, so these are our big important dates. The fiscal year for the state of California is July 1st to June 30th. January 10th, the governor releases his proposed budget for the following year. The following year being right now 2020, 2021. And then the legislature weighs in and figures out, okay, do we agree with these proposals? Do we not agree with these proposals? As we discussed, and we're going to talk about in a minute, there's opportunities before and after each of these events for you to get involved and see if you can have an influence on what happens. May 14th, the governor releases what is called the May revision. And again, this is based on having a better idea of where revenues are going to come in, and also the federal government, who determines what the cost of living adjustment will be, the COLA. They make that determination around the end of April, and it's done by the Department of Commerce, and it's based on the cost of goods and services, and the statutory COLA is based on a federal basis, but affects us locally in California. And our cost of living may be more than the cost of living in Montana, but we all get the same cost of living adjustment. So June 15th, the legislature must pass a balanced budget. And they passed a law a few years ago that if they didn't have a balanced budget by the 15th of June, that the legislators would not get paid. So they have been very, very good about doing this now. And then by June 30th, the governor signs the budget. He or she has the option to line item veto certain things. So if the legislature has added things in that he or she does not agree with, they can cross them out. But there's usually just a lot of negotiation between the governor's office and the legislature to come to agreement, so that we don't see a lot of veto, because they want to come out with a balanced budget that everybody is in agreement to. And then the state starts doling out the dollars as soon as that gets signed and in place.
And this is on June 30th, just to give you a break for a sec also.
Thank you.
You're welcome. June 30th is also the point at which, definitely under Brown, although I don't know if Newsom has followed this, we used to suddenly see a lot of unanticipated money come in the form of one-time payments. And that would typically happen, I think, at the very end of the process between June 15th and June 30th. And so people who are bargaining are used to hearing, oh, these were unanticipated one-time funds. And that did often happen under Brown at the end of the budget process.
Right. The reason that happens is because when they start the budget process in January, they don't know what all the revenues are going to be. They are estimating what they think the revenues will be. And sometimes what will happen is that they'll realize, oh, some revenues we got is actually going to affect what we gave out last year. And so that's where Brown used to come up with his one-time money. And Newsom is so far less inclined to do that, with the exception of last year. What he did was, when he paid down the CalSTRS and CalPERS, when he put money to gave money to districts to pay towards those obligations, that was in essence one-time money. They had it one time based on the previous year's revenues coming in higher than they anticipated. The consequences of that particular action are lasting much longer than one time. But it was the use of that kind of money, that sort of found money, because revenues came in higher than they thought. And this year, like I stated earlier, he's come up with some one-time programs that he'd like to see enacted. And again, that goes back to the district liked it better when Brown did it, because Brown would give them the money and say, found money, use it one time. And then the people like school services would say, fine, great, one-time money, don't use it on anything that eats, because that money isn't going to last. So that's why districts were not inclined to give that money to you in salary raises. They were just like, oh no, this is found money, and we only have it one time, we're not going to see it again. And so that's kind of how that came about. So the last slide here, and I don't know how hard this is going to be to see, it looks pretty clear, but the little brown boxes that are going around this circle represents when the public has the opportunity to weigh in on what is going on in the Capitol with the budget. And I'm going to take you to the CFT website and show you a couple of other places where you can find this. But the thing I want to remind you is that we have lobbyists. If you have concerns about the budget, certainly contact the lobbyists about your concerns. If you have things that you would like to see and pay attention to what CFT is prioritizing in terms of our desires for what we'd like to see in the budget. But you do have the opportunities to weigh in and make sure that your assembly person and state senator knows how you feel about it and what the impact is going to be on your districts. And so you do have an opportunity to change these priorities. So if we could go to the CFT website.
Sure, hang on just a second.
I'm sorry?
Hang on just a second, and I will get us there.
Okay, so the thing I wanted to show you on here is that CFT does, put up on our, Zeb and I were talking about this earlier, this website is really great. It's just really good. But the first thing I want you to look at is we have about the budget process. So if you go,
Did we lose the screen share?
Yeah.
All right, hang on a sec. Let's see if I get it back.
Technology at its, if we go to take action, and then we'll go to legislative advocacy. Under state budget there on the left-hand side. And then just scroll down a little bit, if you could, please. What you can see here is, again, those dates that we just went over, and when are the opportunities for us as community members to weigh in about what's going on, and when are the important deadlines that you really need to get to. If you could click on the Citizens Guide, the budget process, the Citizens Guide to Participation, I would suggest that people have a look at this as well. This is a really good document that was put out by the Department of Finance, I believe, and it is a really excellent document in terms of how can you participate and how can you get involved and what kinds of things can you do. So I would suggest looking at that, and then if we could get back on to us. The next thing I would like you to, can you scroll back down?
Oh, you want me to scroll back down? I was going to do the Find Your Legislator.
Oh, no, give me just one second. I just want to show this one other thing. And that is the CFT research brief. So every time this happens at the governor's proposed budget, then it will happen again in the May revise, and then it will happen again when the actual budget comes out. And two different publications will come out. One is done by the legislative office, the legislative reps, the lobbyists, and that is done from the perspective of legislation. The other one is done by the research department, and that is done a little bit more from the perspective of bargaining and how will this budget affect you in bargaining. So I really do recommend that you look at those when they come out and have a feeling about both perspectives. So should we go to the calendar and look at Lobby Day that is coming up?
Sure, absolutely. For those who haven't used it before, by the way, the new website is highly functional in a lot of ways and is a fantastic resource for a lot of information. One of those is the calendar, and I think Joanna is going to take us to a couple of specific activities. But it's right here on the top of the website whenever you navigate to it. So we'll take a look at that. And what would you like us to find?
So we have on February 25th coming up the ECTK 12 Lobby Day. And what this is, for those of you who don't know, and they have one for community college, and they have one for classified, and they have one for, so that, everybody tries to get involved in these. But this is an opportunity for you to go with the lobbyists and actually lobby your senators and your assembly, state assembly persons. And so I really recommend people doing this. If you do not know who your legislative people are, there's a nice link there that says find the members of your legislative districts. If you click on that real quick, you can see how easy this is. You just put in your address and it will give you the names of the people. And then when you're registering, let's see who Zeb's are.
So you simply put in your information, you hit locate, and it'll spit out exactly which Assembly and Senate district you're in and who your representatives are.
And the thing to think about when you're doing this is both where you live and where your district is, or where your, you know, so kind of think about it both ways, because you want to be talking to the legislators about both of these issues, you know, about how the funding affects you in both ways. So we go back again to that. If you scroll down a little bit, you can see here how super easy it is to sign up for Lobby Day. And then since they asked this question about your Assembly district number and your Senate district number, I think if you go down, it might ask it for, where you work as well. So that information is easily accessible. It'd be great if you guys came. We love having people up here. Sacramento's it's fun. The Capitol's neat. It's fun to go around and talk to the legislators. I think it's just a really great opportunity, and they do listen. I mean, they really do listen to what people have to say, so you can affect the priorities.
Joanna, I want to thank you so much for putting this together for folks. And oh, Cassie, do you have a question? Okay. Now I want to thank you so much for not just for putting this together and sharing it with everybody on the webinar today, but also for all the work that you've done. I might as well take this opportunity to recognize the work that you've done for the last couple of years as research director, and for many, many years before that.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that.
We really appreciate it as staff who often don't understand the same things about the state budget, and also the work you've done has really contributed to so much of the work that people have done, both lobbying for legislation and understanding how to bargain the best contracts they can under difficult circumstances. So thank you so much for all of your work.
Well, thank you. It's been an honor.